They didn't even wait until I left the room. The moment I told them I was broke, they laughed. My own blood, people I'd carried for years, smirking in the house I paid for. Not a cruel laugh, not wild, the quiet kind that says, finally, you're beneath us now. My son leaned against the wall, arms crossed, pretending to care while enjoying the fall. My daughter whispered, maybe you should sell the place, like mercy was a business offer. My brother poured himself a drink from my bottle and said, guess the big man finally ran out. That's the one that stung. Not because of what he said, but because I realized he'd been waiting to say it. I stood there watching their mouths move, but I didn't hear the words anymore. I only saw hands that had taken, faces that had practiced pity, and hearts that never planned to give back. The noise faded, and in that silence, something inside me clicked. Not anger, clarity. They thought I was finished. They thought I had nothing left. But what they didn't know was that I had already built my test long before this night. When the door shut behind them, I looked at the old table, the single light flickering above it, and I said, this is the night I stopped bleeding for them. That's how it began. Not with shouting, not with tears, but with a laugh I'd never forget. Morning has a way of pretending nothing happened. The city woke up like it always did. Sirens in the distance, footsteps above the ceiling, coffee brewing somewhere that wasn't mine. But inside this apartment, silence sat heavy. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it accuses. I stared at the kitchen table, 3 chairs still pushed back from last night. Their fingerprints still on the glass. 1 half-empty cup, the one my brother used without asking. The smell of cheap whiskey and betrayal still floating in the air. I thought about cleaning, but I didn't. It felt right to leave the mess, to see it, to remember. Because that's what they left behind. The proof that I'd been a fool in my own home. And in a strange way, that proof steadied me. I used to think peace came from giving. That if I gave enough, helped enough, stayed patient long enough, love would come back around. But love that's bought with favors always runs out of credit. And last night, my account hit 0. The window light cut across the room, thin and pale. It hit the edge of the table and I could see dust drifting in it, slow, lazy, like time itself had stopped caring. That's when I realized I wasn't angry. Anger burns out fast. This was colder, like a tide pulling back before a storm. I reached for the old journal on the counter, a habit I'd picked up when my wife was still alive. She used to say, write it down so it doesn't rot inside you. Back then, it was full of grocery lists, small notes, reminders to call the kids. Now it would have one purpose: truth. I opened a fresh page, dated it, and wrote, they laughed, and I listened. That was all for now, because before I could plan what came next, I needed to understand how we got here, how love turned into a ledger, how I turned into their safety net. I thought back to the first time I said yes. My son, young, reckless, called one winter night, voice shaking. He said he was in trouble, needed a little help. I wired the money before he even finished explaining. He promised to pay it back. He never did. And I never asked, because I thought that's what fathers did. They give and they forget. Then it was my daughter. Her voice was softer, her requests sweeter, always wrapped in care, always timed perfectly. A down payment, a favor, a bridge loan. Each time I told myself it was fine, that she'd remember how I showed up when no one else did. But gratitude fades faster than guilt. After a while, her calls stopped coming, except when she needed something again. And then there was my brother, the one who always joked that I was the stable one, as if that was a flaw. He'd show up with a smile and a story. Business gone wrong, car broke down, some deal that just needed a little push. He'd promised to pay me back next month. Next month turned into next year. Then it turned into never. It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about what it revealed, how easily people confuse kindness with weakness, and maybe deep down, I'd let them. Because needing to be needed made me feel less alone, but that illusion died last night. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt awake. I made coffee, bitter, burnt, the kind that tastes like honesty, the kind that doesn't lie about what it is. As it dripped, I looked around this apartment. The peeling paint, the flickering bulb, the photo of her still on the wall, smiling like she knew this day would come. She used to warn me, people don't always love you. They love what you give them. I laughed back then. I'm not laughing now. The phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. I didn't answer. Probably one of them, pretending to check on me, making sure the broken old man hadn't done anything dramatic. But I was done performing. This time, the silence was mine. I sat back down at the table, hands steady, and drew 3 small circles on the page. No names, just symbols. Each circle would hold a truth. Each truth would hold a choice. Because this time, I wasn't going to react. I was going to study them, the way they'd studied me. Outside, the city roared to life. Horns, shouts, the endless hum of survival. Inside, I turned off the light and let the shadows stretch across the floor. Sometimes the best way to start over is to stay very still and let the world think you're finished. Because that's when they show you who they really are. And when they do, you don't need to raise your voice. You just write it down. That afternoon, I went out just to breathe. The air in my apartment felt used, like it had already passed through too many lies. Outside, the city was half awake, half decayed. Neon signs flickered over cracked sidewalks, and the wind carried the smell of fried food and wet asphalt. I walked with no direction, just letting the noise drown out the echo of last night. Every few blocks, I caught pieces of other people's lives, arguments spilling out of windows, a woman crying into her phone, a man begging for change. It reminded me that everyone carries their own disaster. Mine just happened to wear familiar faces. I ended up near the diner I used to go to with her. The same corner booth, the same humming light above it. Back then, we'd sit for hours, 2 cups of coffee, 1 dream between us. Now it was just me, and even the waitress had changed. She smiled politely, not recognizing the man who'd once tipped too much because his wife told him kindness always circles back. I ordered black coffee, no sugar, no comfort. Halfway through the cup, my phone lit up. My brother's name. For a second, I thought of ignoring it, but curiosity won. Snakes always hiss before they bite. He didn't even say hello, just, "You doing okay?" His voice had that practiced sympathy, the kind you buy cheap and sell high. Before I could answer, he went on, "Listen, if things are that bad, maybe let me handle the car. I could take it off your hands, save you the trouble." Save me the trouble. That's what he called it. A man who'd borrowed from me for years now offering to save me by stripping what was left. I said nothing. Just listened to his words folding around themselves. Then I said, "Sure. Come by tomorrow." My tone calm, my pulse not. He didn't hear the difference. When I hung up, the waitress came back. She saw my face and asked, "Rough day?" I almost laughed. If only she knew. I left a few bills under the cup, stood, and walked out. By the time I got home, the sky had turned to bruised gray. Rain threatened, but didn't deliver, the kind of weather that holds its breath. I sat at the table again, opened the journal, and wrote. He called first. Then, beneath it, offered help, took aim. That was the first crack, not the moment he asked. I expected that. The crack was me noticing how calm I was. No rage, no shaking hands, just a cold curiosity, like watching a spider rebuild its web strand by strand. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the call, every word, every tone. There was something liberating about it, like finally seeing a shadow in full light. I realized I'd spent most of my life pretending not to notice things. The small digs, the half-truths, the way people you love can turn need into weapon. But silence isn't forgiveness. It's storage. And my storage was full. Around 2 a.m., I got up, poured a drink, and sat by the window. Across the street, in another building, a man stood smoking under a flickering sign. He looked like me, tired, still, waiting for something that wouldn't come. Maybe we all have a breaking point, a night when we decide to stop being polite about pain. That was mine. The next morning, I woke early. No alarm, just the weight of purpose. The phone rang again. This time it was my daughter. Her voice was gentle, too gentle. "Dad, I heard from Uncle. Are you okay?" I told her yes. She hesitated, then said, "If you ever need to sell the apartment, Paul and I could help. We've been looking for an investment property. We could make sure you're comfortable, of course." There it was again. Comfortable. The same word, same mask. I smiled even though she couldn't see it. "Thank you," I said. "That's generous." And I meant it. Generous of them to show me what they were. After the call, I didn't move for a long time. Just sat there, letting the sunlight crawl across the floor. Then I took the small recorder from the drawer, the one I used years ago to capture notes for work. I checked the battery, cleaned the mic, and placed it right on the table, next to the journal. 2 witnesses that never lie. I started talking quietly, repeating every word they said, every offer, every tone. Not for revenge, not yet. Just for record, because the truth fades when left unspoken. And this time, I wasn't letting it vanish. At noon, my brother showed up. Early, eager. He came in smiling, pretending to look concerned. "Just checking on you," he said, eyes already scanning the room. Then he saw the car keys on the counter. Picked them up like they were his. "You really sure you want to keep driving this old thing? I can get you something smaller, easier." I watched him talk, hands gesturing, lips moving, and it hit me how theatrical it all was. He didn't know the recorder on the shelf was already blinking red. When he left, I played the recording back. The sound of his voice, oily and confident, filled the room, and underneath it, the faint hum of the city outside, as if the whole world was listening with me. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and whispered, "Keep talking, brother. The truth sounds better when it's yours." That night, I wrote again. "They think I'm weak because I'm quiet. They forget what silence can hold." And somewhere between that line and the next breath, I decided. I wouldn't confront them. I'd let them build their story. I'd let them decorate their lies with kindness. Then, when the time came, I'd play it back to them word for word. No shouting, no threats. Just their own voices echoing in a room that finally told the truth. I closed the journal, turned off the light, and sat in the dark, listening to the city's heartbeat through the walls. People always talk about closure, but what they don't tell you is that sometimes closure isn't peace. It's preparation. And I was just getting started. The days after that were quieter than usual. Not peaceful, just quiet in that way the city gets right before rain. Every sound feels distant, like the world's holding its breath. I moved through the apartment like a ghost who still paid rent. No calls, no texts, no visits, not for a while. And that silence became my ally. I started recording everything. Not the calls, not yet, but the small things. Footsteps in the hallway, the hum of the fridge, my own voice reading what they'd said. It wasn't evidence in the legal sense, it was rhythm. I wanted to feel the shape of deceit, how it entered, how it spread, how it sounded when it thought no one was listening. I kept the recorder on the shelf beside the photo of her. Every night I'd turn it on for a minute and talk to her like I used to. She'd always been the quiet one. She understood patience, the kind that doesn't come from calm, but from clarity. Sometimes I imagined her voice replying, not with comfort, but with direction. You don't win by shouting, she'd say in my head. You win by staying still long enough for them to trip. The plan formed slowly. Not out of anger, that would have burned too fast, but out of precision. If they saw me crumble, they'd stay confident. If I vanished, they'd get curious. So I stayed exactly where I was, doing exactly what they expected, until they stopped watching. That's when I started changing the rules. First, I canceled everything that tied me to them. Shared accounts, automatic transfers, passwords I knew they remembered. Then I made copies of every paper in the house. Bills, deeds, statements, old emails. Each one went into a plain envelope, labeled in pencil. Not because I feared losing them, but because truth, once written, becomes immune to charm. I bought a small lockbox from a pawn shop on 8th Street. The clerk didn't ask what it was for, and I didn't tell him. I liked that. Some transactions don't need words. When I got home, I placed the first 3 envelopes inside, one for each of them. No names, no notes, just the facts they'd created. Their own words, their own offers, their own help. The silence between those lines was louder than any argument. Days passed. Rain came and left. And little by little they started calling again. Not all at once. The cycle always starts with the softest one. My daughter first. Dad, I've been thinking. Maybe you should move in with us, just until you get back on your feet. Her voice was smooth, practiced, almost kind. She meant it to sound like love. It sounded like management. I told her I appreciated it. Then I let her talk. She mentioned space and comfort and how it'd be easier if you didn't have to worry about your bills. I didn't ask which bills. She already knew. After we hung up, I replayed the recording. Her tone shifted near the end. A hesitation, a small crack in the act. She wasn't cruel. She was careful. That's worse. Then came my brother again, 2 days later. He dropped by without warning, like always. Brought takeout, as if noodles and politeness could erase everything. He asked how I'd been sleeping, then steered the talk toward opportunities. He'd found someone interested in taking the place off your hands. A friend, he said. Someone who'd offer a good price in cash. That word again, cash. Always the quickest way to test a man's moral temperature. I listened, nodded, even thanked him. He looked proud of himself, like he'd just saved me from ruin. Before he left, I said, "Leave your number for that buyer. I'll think about it." He did, and I watched him write it down. His handwriting the same careless scrawl it's always been, as if he never expected anyone to hold his words accountable. The moment the door closed, I folded that note, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote one word on it. Offer. Then I placed it in the lockbox, right between call and help. 3 pieces now. 3 truths. That night, I sat by the window again. The city lights looked like dying stars, and I wondered how many people out there were living the same quiet wars. How many fathers, brothers, friends were smiling through betrayal just because silence felt safer than confrontation. But silence isn't safety. It's a seed. And if you water it long enough with memory, it grows into something unshakable. Around midnight, the rain started again. Hard this time. The sound against the windows was steady, like someone knocking from the outside. I took the recorder, pressed play, and listened to the day unspool in fragments. Voices, pauses, the hum of deceit. It was strange. Hearing it back made it sound almost ordinary. And that terrified me more than anger ever could. Because that's how betrayal hides, not in the noise, but in the tone that sounds just kind enough to pass. I picked up the pen and wrote one more thing in the journal. Silence has layers. I'm learning how to use each one. Then I added a question beneath it. What would they do if the roles were reversed? The thought lingered, and slowly an idea began to take shape, one that made my pulse steady, not race. What if I didn't expose them? What if I gave them the stage to expose themselves? I'd make the cracks bigger. I'd offer them chances, Opportunities dressed as kindness, the same way they once offered them to me, and when they took them, I wouldn't need to punish them. They'd do that themselves. The plan wasn't perfect yet, but it was clean, simple, lawful, the kind of justice no one could argue with. I turned off the recorder, looked at the flickering bulb above the table, and felt something close to peace. Not forgiveness, not yet, but purpose. A quiet kind of power that doesn't need witnesses. They'd built their lies on the belief that I was finished. They'd mistaken stillness for surrender. Now they'd learn the truth. Silence isn't what happens when you give up. It's what happens when you start to listen differently. And I had just begun. It started with a message I wasn't supposed to see. A mistake? Or maybe fate wearing casual clothes. My phone lit up one afternoon while I was at the window, half listening to the rain. A notification flashed, my daughter's name, followed by a preview that froze me mid-breath. He'll cave soon, don't rush him. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at the words glowing against the dark screen, each one sharp as glass. He'll cave soon. Like I was drywall, not flesh. Like my silence was a weakness, not a weapon. When I finally tapped it open, the rest unfolded like a confession written by accident. A group chat. Her, my brother, my son, 3 names, 3 hearts I'd once trusted, talking about me like an investment they were waiting to mature. Don't spook him. He's stubborn but not stupid. If he doesn't sell, the taxes will bury him. He'll have no choice. No choice. That phrase hit deeper than the laughter from that first night. Because laughter is impulsive. This was planned. Strategic. They'd turned me into a math problem. Predictable, solvable, expendable. I put the phone down, slowly. The city outside blurred through the rain-streaked glass. People passed below, rushing through their own storms, and I realized something terrifying. None of them would ever know how betrayal looks in daylight. It doesn't shout, it whispers, and it always sounds reasonable. I didn't text back, didn't delete anything. I just let it sit there, glowing in the dim room like a small, cruel sun. That night, I went out. The streets smelled like wet metal and gasoline. Every light reflected twice, once in the puddles, once in the windows. It felt like walking through a city built on reflections, everyone showing a version of themselves that could vanish with one ripple. I found a bar I used to go to years ago. Dark, narrow, music soft enough that thoughts could still be louder. I sat at the end of the counter and ordered the cheapest whiskey. The bartender didn't ask questions. He could tell I wasn't here to talk. After a while, someone slid onto the stool beside me, the kind of presence that announces itself before the person does. My brother. He didn't see the surprise in my eyes. He thought he was in control of the script. He clapped me on the shoulder like nothing had ever been broken between us. "Didn't expect to see you out," he said, grinning that salesman grin, all teeth, no warmth. "Needed air," I said. He nodded, flagged the bartender, ordered another round, both on my tab. Of course, we talked about nothing at first. Weather, sports, empty words to fill heavier silence. Then he leaned in, voice low. "You know about the house. My friend's getting impatient. He's got other options. Might not wait forever." I let that hang. He took my silence for hesitation, not strategy, so he pushed harder. "Come on, man. You're sitting on a gold mine, and it's just rotting there. You can't keep up the maintenance, the taxes alone." He stopped himself, caught the edge of his tone, smiled again. "I mean, you shouldn't have to deal with all that. Let me handle it. I'll make sure you get a good deal." And there it was. The slip. The small crack where truth leaked through charm. He didn't say help anymore. He said deal. He wasn't offering mercy. He was negotiating ownership. I looked at him. Really looked. The lines around his eyes had deepened. Not from laughter, but calculation. The same eyes that used to watch me fix things as a kid, now measuring how much of me was left to take. I smiled. Slow, genuine, confusing. That's generous of you, I said. He relaxed. He thought he'd won. Then I added, you should tell your buyer I'll think about it. I like doing things properly. Paperwork, signatures, you know. Legal. His smile faltered, just for a second. A flicker. Then it returned, but the mask had a crack now. He finished his drink quickly and left with a pat on my back, the same hand that had once asked for help, now claiming victory. When he was gone, I sat there a while longer. The ice in my glass melted into water, and in that tiny circle of silence, I realized the game had changed. I wasn't the prey anymore. I was the mirror, and soon they'd see themselves exactly as they were. Back home, I wrote everything down. Not just what he said, but how he said it. The pauses, the tone, the way his eyes darted when I mentioned the word legal. Then I printed the messages from that group chat. 3 copies, one for each of them. Folded, sealed, labeled, then locked them away beside the others. I called an old friend the next morning, someone who owed me nothing, which made him the only one I could trust. He worked in real estate law. I told him I needed help updating my documents, quietly. He didn't ask why. Maybe he'd seen enough families tear themselves apart to know the tone of a man past breaking. Within a week, the papers were done. My name alone on every title. A trust account locked with my signature only. Everything clean, legal, unassailable. The kind of security you build not for wealth, but for peace. And then I waited. Because snakes always return to the same warmth. It didn't take long. 3 days later, my daughter showed up. Unannounced, like she always did when guilt dressed as concern. She brought groceries, a bag full of apologies in plastic form. Dad, you shouldn't be living like this, she said, eyes scanning the room for proof of my decline. I'm fine, I told her. She smiled, the kind people use to soften a demand. Then she slipped. You know, Paul's been talking to Uncle. We really think selling would take the pressure off you. We. There it was again. Unity built on someone else's ruin. I nodded slowly, pretending to weigh her words, pretending to still be the man they thought I was. Then I said softly, I'll think about it. Why don't you all come over this weekend? We can talk it through. She brightened. Agreement always sounds like surrender to those who've never met restraint. When she left, I sat alone in the half-light, the city outside humming like a patient heartbeat. The trap was almost ready, not to harm, but to hold a mirror steady until they couldn't look away. I placed one last note in the lockbox. Saturday, recording on. Then I closed it, turned the key, and whispered to the empty room. They wanted me silent. Let's see how they handled the echo. Saturday came dressed like a tired clerk. Gray jacket, careful footsteps, nothing flashy enough to warn anyone what it was carrying. I woke before the light climbed the buildings and let the apartment stay dim on purpose. The room works better that way. People tell on themselves in soft light. I set the table the way I wanted the night to end. 3 plain glasses, water only. The recorder tucked into the open mouth of an old ceramic planter on the shelf. The journal angled where my hand could reach it without thought. The lockbox hidden in the cabinet beneath the sink. The photo stayed on the wall, steady as a judge. When the knock finally came, I didn't jump. My daughter first, with a bag of groceries like last time and a tone rehearsed for kindness. My son next, shoulders squared, pace quick, carrying the smell of new money and old impatience. My brother last, uninvited, pretending to be surprised he had arrived at the exact right minute. They brought weather with them, heat where there should have been warmth. We said hello. We sat. We didn't breathe the same air. I won't waste your time, I began, almost casual. If this place is too heavy for me, like you keep saying, then we need a plan. But if you want my signature on anything, I want your words on paper first. I slid 3 sheets across the table. Not contracts, not legal traps, just pages with one line at the top. What are you offering, exactly? And why does it help me? My son smirked, then shrugged. Sure. He loves forms. They make control look generous. My daughter hesitated, then reached for the pen, steadying herself with a small breath. My brother grinned like a man about to sell the air. I stood, walked to the sink, turned on the tap. White noise to hide the click of the recorder as I started it from the shelf. When I turned back, the room had changed. It always does when people write. Words make people honest in strange ways. My son finished first. He pushed the paper toward me like a tip. Transfer the deed into my name temporarily, he'd written, so I can manage taxes, maintenance, and decisions more efficiently. You can stay as long as needed. I read it once, then again, slower, temporarily, efficiently. Stay as long as needed. He'd used the language of safety to build a cage. My daughter's paper looked different. She'd written more, then crossed out half, then started again in careful letters. Move in with us for a while, it said. If selling eases your stress, we'll help coordinate it. We'll make sure you're comfortable and not alone. Comfortable, not alone. Mercy with handles, so it could be carried away later without guilt. My brother took the longest. He pretended to think deeply, then scribbled like a man signing a check with someone else's pen. Introduce you to a cash buyer I trust, he wrote. Clean, quick, no stress. I'll handle the situation and make sure you're taken care of. Handled. Taken care of. Ownership dressed as rescue. Good, I said lightly, palming each sheet. Now talk me through them, out loud. They did. My son's explanation turned into a lecture on responsibility. My daughter's into a warm blanket that kept slipping off just enough to show the floor. My brother's into a sales pitch with the lights turned low. I didn't argue. I asked small questions. For how long? Who decides? Where do I sleep? Every answer put another nail in a structure they thought was a bridge but looked like a box from where I sat. When the talking slowed, I poured water into each glass and slid them across. Let's be clear, I said. I appreciate you caring. The word felt foreign in my mouth. But if I take any path, I want proof of what you're promising. Write one more line. What you guarantee in return for my signature. Then we're done for today. They stared at me, unsure if I was surrendering or teasing them closer to the edge. It didn't matter. They wrote. My son guaranteed stable management, which means I'd watch him run my life from the other side of a locked door. My daughter guaranteed comfort and family, which means she'd cry when it was inconvenient to keep me. My brother guaranteed the best number on the table, which means whatever he could skim with a handshake that didn't include mine. I stacked the sheets together, tapped them even on the tabletop, and smiled like a man who trusts sunlight over sound. Thanks, I said. I'll sleep on it. My brother bristled. Sleep? There's momentum here. My son glanced at the door, calculating. We could start filing this week. My daughter's eyes softened. You don't have to decide alone. I'm not, I replied. I'm deciding with time. That's the only partner I trust. No one moved for a beat. The building hummed. A bus growled on the street. The refrigerator clicked. Then the chairs scraped back. They stood, shook off the moment like rain, and left with small exit lines. Call me, let me know. I'll check on you tomorrow. When the door closed, I reached for the planter, pressed stop, and listened to the apartment breathe again. I didn't play the recording back right away. I already knew what it would say. Instead, I opened the cabinet, pulled the lockbox, and laid the papers carefully inside. Under call. Help. Offer. A new folder. Promises. That evening, the buyer called, the one my brother trusted. He spoke smoothly, like a man who practices smiling in the mirror. He described the market as if I'd never seen a street or a sunrise. He floated a number that sounded kinder than theft if you weren't listening. I put him on speaker and pretended the connection was fuzzy so he'd fill the silence with more truth. He did. When he hung up, I named the new envelope Price of Mercy. I slid it into the box and felt something inside me lock into place. This was never about property. It was about posture, about whether I would stay standing while people I loved tried to sit on my chest with paperwork. The next day I asked for one final meeting. Not here. Neutral ground. I told them a community room 2 blocks over would do. The one with the weak coffee and the clock that always runs a little slow. I told them to bring their best version of concern. I told them we'd invite someone to witness. Not a judge, not a lawyer. Just a person who writes things down for a living. They showed up on time. Guilt and greed rarely arrived late. The room was all echo and linoleum, the kind of place where birthdays and breakups happen under the same fluorescent lights. A woman from the desk brought us paper cups of coffee and stayed by the door with her clipboard, a presence so plain it disappeared until it mattered. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that truth likes ordinary rooms. I opened the meeting as if I were bidding farewell to a piece of furniture, calm, practiced. I've heard your offers. I've read your guarantees. Let's put them side by side and see which one's about me. We went through them aloud. My son bristled at any word he couldn't control. My daughter washed hers in apology. My brother spoke like a man selling a watch made of steam. Every few minutes, the woman at the door lifted her pen and wrote. I could feel their eyes flick to her, then back to me. Witnesses change how people breathe. Halfway through, my brother slipped again. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. Look, the buyer's ready. It's a friendly deal. If we sign this week, I can arrange a little something on the side for the family. On the side. For the family. There was the shape of it. Naked, not help. Consolidation. My son cleared his throat, tried to polish it. What he means is, we'd make sure decisions benefit everyone in the long run. Everyone? I asked. Including you, of course, he said, like a man remembering the last detail of a lie. My daughter looked down at her hands. She didn't correct them. That was her slip. Silence in the exact moment truth needed a whisper. The clock twitched toward the top of the hour. The woman at the door capped her pen. If there's anything you'd like me to summarize, she said, I can read it back now. Not yet, I told her. One more item. I reached into my coat and placed 3 thin envelopes on the table. White, unmarked. Each one held a copy of something I wasn't supposed to see. They stared at the envelopes like they were ticking. Take them, I said. Open when you get home. Read your words back to yourselves in a room where no one claps. No one moved. My brother laughed, too loud for a small space. What is this drama? Reflection, I said. The kind that doesn't need a stage. I stood. Meeting's over. We're done making offers in the dark. They followed me out into the hallway, still talking, voices overlapping the way waves crash when the storm doesn't know it's finished. I didn't answer. The woman with the clipboard handed me a slip with the meeting time stamped on it. Neutral ink, honest paper. I thanked her. Then I walked home through air that tasted like metal and rain. Back in the apartment, I finally pressed play. The sound filled the room. Chairs, cups, breath. The ocean of half-truths trying to convince me it was a lake. And for the first time since the laugh in my living room, my hands shook. Not from anger, from recognition. They had given me everything I needed without understanding what it was worth. I wrote 3 lines in the journal. They don't know I'm not selling a place. They're selling themselves. Tomorrow, I turn on the lights. I slept that night like a man who'd finally found the right switch in a dark room. No dreams, no visitors. Just the steady hum of a city that doesn't bless or curse. It just keeps going. And in that rhythm, I heard my own pulse answering for the first time in a long time. Not revenge. Not cruelty. Control. When morning came, I called a number I hadn't dialed in years. An old neighbor who now ran community forums, small gatherings where disputes got aired before they turned into headlines. He remembered my wife. He remembered us in better light. I asked if he had room on the schedule for a short session. He did. "Bring your papers," he said. "Bring your people if they're brave." "I'll bring both," I told him, and meant it. I set the recorder on the counter, replaced its batteries, wiped the lens of my phone with the corner of my shirt. Out of habit, I didn't know I still had. I tucked the lockbox under my arm and looked once at the photo. Not for strength, for direction. She seemed to say what she'd always said, the thing I had dismissed back when kindness still felt like safety. Justice doesn't shout. It signs. I nodded to the empty room like it could nod back. Then I put on my coat, locked the door, and carried the quiet with me down the stairs. The day was bright enough to be cruel. Good. Truth deserves a clear window. And if they wanted to see, I was ready to show them, under lights that don't flicker, with paper that doesn't smudge, in a room where silence finally means something other than surrender. Tomorrow, the mirror would stand on its own, and for once, I wouldn't have to hold it. The community room looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe because last time I'd been here, I was a guest at someone else's mercy. Now the mercy was mine to give. Rows of folding chairs lined the walls, a bulletin board sagged with flyers for lost pets and weekend choirs. Ordinary things, exactly the kind of backdrop truth likes best. The moderator greeted me first. Same neighbor who'd agreed to hold this discussion. He'd aged the way honest men do, soft around the eyes, firm around the spine. "You sure you want this to be open?" he asked. "Just bright enough," I said. "No need for an audience, just witnesses." My family came in together, pretending coincidence. They looked polished, rehearsed, faces ironed flat by self-assurance. Each held a folder like a shield. My daughter smiled too wide. My brother avoided my eyes. My son carried confidence like a briefcase. We sat at the long table. The fluorescent lights hummed above, steady and merciless. The neighbor opened with civility. "Let's clarify intentions. Everyone here claims to be helping. Mr. he gestured to me, wants clarity. Speak freely, but keep it respectful." Respect. Such a light word for such heavy deceit. My brother went first, naturally. He always liked being the narrator. He talked about responsibility, how families must streamline decisions when elders struggle. My son nodded along, adding jargon about efficiency and protecting assets. My daughter framed it as love. "We just don't want him stressed, you know. He's been through so much." I let them build their tower of reason until it started to lean. Then I slid a small speaker onto the table. Plain black, red light waiting. "Before we go further," I said quietly, "let's make sure we're all working from the same memory." Click. Their voices filled the room. The previous meeting, their promises, the buyer's name, every word they thought had disappeared into air. The sound wasn't loud, but it changed the gravity. My daughter's mouth fell open. My brother's smile evaporated like steam off a blade. My son froze halfway between outrage and calculation. "Where did you—" my brother began. "You gave it to me," I said. "Every time you opened your mouth." The neighbor didn't move. He simply leaned back, arms crossed, listening. Silence swallowed the space after the playback ended. I spoke softly, almost kindly. "You said you wanted to help. Here's your help, printed and time-stamped." From my coat, I drew 3 envelopes and placed them down one by one, slow enough that each thud landed like a heartbeat. "Inside are your offers, your words, your messages, and my signatures, the ones that protect this home, my name, and my peace. They're filed, witnessed, and notarized. Every kindness you proposed has been recorded as intent. Every promise as condition. That's how responsibility works." My son tried the legal angle first. You can't record people without— I can in my own house, I said. And I did. But that's not what matters. What matters is meaning. You spoke about family as if it were paperwork. I'm just treating it accordingly. The neighbor cleared his throat, breaking the tension just enough for breath. Perhaps, he said carefully, each of you should respond now that the context is clear. My daughter's eyes glossed with tears that came too quickly to be earned. Dad, we were scared, she said. We didn't know how bad things were. You knew enough to make plans, I replied. She looked down, words evaporating. My brother leaned forward, desperate to reclaim ground. You're twisting this. We were trying to protect what's left. If you'd been honest about your situation— I was, I interrupted. Just not in the way you expected. My son finally spoke, calm and deliberate, the way men do when cornered by their own reflection. So what's this then? Some moral theater? You've proven your point. What do you want? I thought about that for a long moment. The question wasn't a trap. It was the last honest thing he'd ever ask me. I want quiet, I said. Not the kind you forced on me. The kind I choose. I slid one last envelope forward, smaller, heavier. This one isn't for you. It's for the clerk downtown. It lists everything you tried to arrange under my name. It's not a lawsuit. It's a statement of independence. After today, none of you can act on my behalf. You don't speak for me, you don't sign for me, and you don't plan for me. We're done mixing care with control. The neighbor read the first line, nodded once, and placed it in his folder. Filed as of today, he said quietly. That was the sound of a door closing. My brother slumped back. My daughter wiped tears that had nowhere to fall. My son just stared at the table, calculating losses that couldn't be measured in dollars. I didn't gloat. Because justice, when it's real, doesn't need applause. It just breathes differently. I stood, the chair legs scraping concrete. You all taught me something, I said. That silence isn't weakness, it's storage, and I've kept enough of it. No one spoke as I walked out. Outside, the air hit colder than before, or maybe cleaner. Cars moved past without noticing history changing half a floor above the street. I walked toward the edge of the block, where the morning sun was catching on the wet pavement. For the first time in months, it didn't feel like glare. It felt like light. At the corner, I passed a man selling used books from a folding table. One spine caught my eye. Reflections in Still Water. I bought it without thinking, slid it under my arm. Maybe because still water had become my language. By the time I reached the apartment, I could hear the city settling into afternoon. Buses sighing, pigeons clattering across rooftops, somebody practicing trumpet in another life. I unlocked the door and stepped back into my quiet kingdom. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. The table, the chair, the photo on the wall. Only difference. The silence now belonged to me. I placed the recorder beside the photo and pressed play one last time. Not the confrontation, not the evidence, just the soft hum that followed it. That sound, the absence of manipulation, was the closest thing to peace I'd felt since before they laughed. I poured a glass of water, raised it toward the photograph. You were right, I murmured. Justice doesn't shout. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere distant, fading fast. I didn't flinch. The city moved on, and so did I. The day after the meeting, the city felt different. Not quieter, cities don't do that, but less inside of me. Noise belonged to the street again, not to my chest. I made coffee, opened the window, and let the wind move a thin curtain that hadn't moved in months. It was such a small thing, I almost missed it. Air going where it wanted without asking permission. I didn't expect calls, but they came anyway. My son first. He didn't say hello, just cleared his throat and tried to build a sentence from driftwood. I've been thinking, he said, as if thinking were an apology. We could have handled things better. We. That old word, with its soft edges and sharp center. I'm not angry, I told him, and it was true. I'm finished. Silence. Then the scrape of his pride across the line. What does that mean? It means I'm not your project, I said. Not your client, not your problem. If you want to know me, come without a plan. He didn't know how to stand without one. He hung up gently, as if putting down a fragile thing he didn't recognize. My daughter called later. I didn't pick up. I let her voice slide into the machine and repeat itself into the little red light. Dad, I'm sorry. I don't know what I was trying to fix. Maybe I was trying to fix how guilty I felt. Guilt is a hammer. It breaks more than it repairs. I saved the message anyway. Not because I needed proof, but because the sound of her trying mattered. I went for a walk before noon, toward the stubborn river that cuts through the tired part of town. Pigeons fought for crumbs under a bench. A kid practiced ollies on a cracked slab of concrete, falling, getting up, falling again. Practice, I thought, is just falling with purpose. Maybe forgiveness works the same way. On the way back, I saw her, the woman from the 4th floor, the one who always holds the elevator with her foot when she sees me coming, as if time is something she can spare. She was struggling with a laundry basket, shoulder pressed to the stairwell door that never opens right. I reached for the handle and pulled. It gave with a sigh. Thank you, she said, smiling in that way people smile when they remember kindness has a shape. You're welcome, I said, and meant it more than usual. Because it reminded me of the thing I had almost forgotten. There are people you don't have to test. Back in the apartment, I opened the lockbox and spread the envelopes across the table one last time. Call, help, offer, promises, price of mercy. They looked like tombstones, small markers for a cemetery I didn't plan to visit again. I stacked them neatly and slid the box to the back of the cabinet. Evidence had served its purpose. It didn't need to live on the counter like a trophy. I took the photo down from the wall, the one where she's half laughing, half trying to keep me from blinking. For years, I'd looked at it for comfort. Today, I looked at it for instruction. What now? I asked the air. The answer arrived the way truth always does, not as a voice, but as a direction, outward. There's a clinic 2 streets over, tucked between a pawn shop and a bakery that refuses to die. They keep a donation jar by the door, the kind people pass without seeing until they need it. I'd been dropping bills in there since before my hair went gray, never enough to notice. This time I asked to speak to the person who keeps the books. Small and quiet, I said. Monthly, in her name. The woman behind the counter nodded like she'd been waiting for someone to say it exactly like that. We signed forms at a little table with a wobbly leg. No speeches, ink, not applause. On my way home, a saxophone was bleeding out of an open window somewhere above the street. Wrong notes and right courage. That's what redemption sounds like from the inside. The phone rang again that evening. Not my son, not my daughter, my brother. He led with irritation, then softened when he realized irritation had no purchase here. Look, we all said things, he offered, as if time were a solvent. We can start over. Starting over, I said, isn't repainting rotten wood. He laughed because he didn't know how else to hold a sentence like that. What do you want from me? Nothing, I said. That's the boundary. He called me stubborn, then wise, then unfair, then hung up in a circle. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt honest. After dark, the neighbor, the moderator from the community room, tapped on my door. He held a folder I recognized. I thought you might want a copy, he said. Inside were the notes from the meeting. Who said what, when, how. Neutral handwriting, no adjectives. Keep it, I told him, in case I forget the shape of the day. He nodded. Most people come in here with the ending they want and try to force the story to match, he said. You came in with the story and let the ending happen? Felt like the only honest way, I replied. He tipped an invisible hat and left the hallway smelling faintly of rain and old wood. I slept early and woke in the kind of silence that doesn't ask for attention. Morning light cut the room into clean pieces. I made toast, burned it, ate it anyway. Imperfection tasted like proof of life. Around mid-morning, there was a softer knock. My daughter stood in the hallway with both hands visible, the way you approach a bird that startles easily. I won't stay, she said. I wanted to see your face when I said I'm sorry. I stepped back, let her in, pointed to the chair that always sits a little crooked. She didn't try to fix it. We sat. No tea, no theater. I keep trying to figure out when I stopped listening, she said. It's not one moment. It's a million tiny ones where I picked convenience over courage. I didn't rescue her. That was my old habit. I let the words find their own legs. I can't give you what you want, I said finally. I don't even know what that is yet, but the door isn't locked. She nodded, swallowed, and looked at the photograph on the wall. I miss her, she said. So do I answered, and the room bent toward that simple truth, like plants toward a window. When she left, she didn't say she'd call. She just squeezed my hand, like a person who understands that next time isn't always a promise. Sometimes it's a practice. That afternoon, I took a small box from the bedroom, wooden with a lid that used to stick. Inside were 3 items. A letter she wrote me once, folded to the same crease every time. The voice recorder, cleaned and quiet, and an envelope with a seal I hadn't broken. I laid them on the table like a ceremony no one else needed to attend. Memory, evidence, closure. The tokens had done their work. I read the letter again, the one where she asked me to be brave in boring ways. I placed the recorder back in the drawer, knowing that victory didn't need witnesses anymore. Then I opened the sealed envelope. A blank page stared up at me. I smiled. Sometimes closure isn't a document. It's space. Near dusk, I went to the roof. The city threw its colors the way it always does, carelessly beautiful. I watched windows light up like small declarations. Somewhere a couple argued. Somewhere a child laughed. Somewhere a radio told the wrong time and no one minded. I thought about calling my son again. Not to lecture, not to invite, just to show him a version of me that didn't need saving or surrendering. I didn't dial. Not because I'm stubborn, because timing is a language, and I'm still learning how to speak it in a way he can hear. On my way back down, I met the kid from the cracked concrete, board under his arm, new scabs on old scrapes. You landed any today? I asked. Almost, he said, grinning with a mouth too brave for his age. But almost counts. Means I do it tomorrow. Keep your feet over the bolts, I told him, pretending I'd always known something worth offering. He nodded like I'd handed him a map. I slept with the window open. At some point in the night, a breeze crossed the room, touched the photo, and kept going. I didn't reach for it. I let it pass. Not everything that moves needs your hand. In the morning, the phone rang once and stopped, a number I recognized and didn't return. I brewed coffee, turned the journal to a clean page, and wrote 4 lines. Boundaries are love with a backbone. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's not volunteering for the same wound. Silence can be prayer when it points outward. I'm not done, just done being someone I'm not. I capped the pen, closed the book, and stood very still. The apartment was the same, but I wasn't. Outside, a bus hissed to a halt and opened its doors for strangers who didn't know they were practicing trust. I took my coat from the chair, ran my thumb over the tired seam at the cuff, and smiled. Tomorrow can come now. It won't find me waiting in the old place. It will find me walking, not away from anyone, but toward the part of the city where light doesn't apologize for being late. The city stretched into morning the way old film stretches between reels, blurred, humming, imperfect. I walked to the corner bakery where the windows always fog before the first customer. The girl behind the counter smiled when she saw me. "Back again?" she said. "Trying to start over," I answered. She poured coffee into a paper cup, no questions attached. Kindness, when it's real, never needs context. I took my cup outside and sat on the cold step. The street smelled of rain and sugar. It had been a week since the meeting. No calls now, no noise. Even guilt runs out of energy eventually. I pulled out the journal, its pages swollen with ink. The last entry was still fresh enough to smell like resolve. I flipped to a clean page and wrote, "Peace isn't payback. It's distance measured in honesty." I looked around, the chipped bench, the delivery truck coughing smoke, the same stray dog sleeping under the stop sign. The world doesn't pause when you fix yourself. It just makes space for the version of you that finally stopped begging for permission. I went back home before the streets filled with horns. The elevator groaned like an old witness. Inside the apartment, I left the door open for the first time in months. Light came in without asking. The photo was still on the table, no longer framed, just resting there, edges curling slightly. I whispered, "You'd laugh at all this, wouldn't you?" Maybe she would have. She used to say I carried my hope like a wallet, always checking if it was still there. This time I didn't need to check. I could feel it breathing. I turned on the small radio, static first, then a blues song bleeding through. The singer's voice was rough, real, unpolished, like someone telling the truth too late but still meaning it. I let it play while I cleaned the table, folded the cloth, washed the glass. Closure isn't a grand gesture. It's dishes done at peace. Around noon, I opened the window wider and watched the city glow in slow motion. Cars glittered like coins tossed into the wrong fountain. Somewhere below, a group of kids were laughing, loud, careless, whole. That sound reminded me that redemption isn't about undoing pain. It's about not passing it forward. I sat by the window and spoke softly, the way people talk when they know no one's listening, but maybe someone will feel it anyway. "I don't hate them," I said. "I just stopped paying rent in the house of disappointment." It wasn't a declaration, just truth finding its own posture. I picked up the recorder one last time, thumbed the worn button, and spoke into the quiet. If you're listening to this, whoever you are, don't mistake stillness for surrender. Don't confuse being alone with being empty. People will test you, let them. But keep the record, not for revenge, but for clarity. Because one day, you'll play it back and realize you weren't losing. You were learning how to stop bleeding for people who never noticed the wound. I set it down, pressed stop, and smiled. Not at victory, at survival with grace. The clock ticked toward afternoon. I wrote one last entry, slower this time. The test was never about them. It was about whether I could tell the difference between love and ownership. I closed the journal and looked around my small, sun-warmed kingdom. Scuffed floors, honest air, no ghosts left to feed. Everything that mattered had stayed. Everything that hurt had taught. That's a fair trade. Outside, a child yelled something about ice cream. Somebody's radio spilled laughter across the alley. And for the first time, I felt the city wasn't something I lived in. It was something I matched. I whispered, "Thank you," to the room, to her, to silence, to the parts of me that waited long enough to heal. Then, with the gentlest breath, I spoke the final words. Not to the walls, but to whoever needed them beyond the screen. If you've ever been laughed at by the people you loved, if your kindness has been mistaken for weakness, remember this. Silence is not the absence of power. It's the space where justice learns to speak. I paused. Let the weight settle. Then finished. If this story found you, maybe it's because you've lived one like it. Tell me what part hit you hardest. Drop a comment and share your truth. Because somewhere, someone else needs to hear it from you. And if you believe that silence can be strength, hit subscribe. We tell these stories not for revenge, but for remembrance. The camera of my mind pulled back. One man in a small apartment, sunlight on the floor, a single page drying in the breeze. That's how it ends. Not with applause, but with peace quietly learning your name.